This is an interview with Miss Helen Crocker in her home at 40 South Drive, Middletown, Rhode Island. It will be concerned with Miss Crocker's life history and is part of the Newport Historical Society's Oral History Project. The interviewer is Beth Everett. The date is June 28, 1984. Miss Crocker, do you consent to have this conversation taped?
Yes, I do.
All right. Well, let's start off with some of your family background. Where were you born?
I was born in Tarrytown on the Hudson in New York and lived there until 1932.
All right. Now, who were your parents? Who was your father?
Charles Edward Crocker.
And who was your mother?
And mother was Helen Crocker.
Do you remember where they were born and when?
Yes, Daddy was born in Norwich, Connecticut in 1875. And he lived to be 101, almost 102. And mother was born 1879, and she lived to be 87. My mother was born in Sleepy Hollow, and believe it or not, that is a really true place.
Oh, isn't that interesting? It is, but it's an area, isn't it? It's on the Hudson.
Yes, it's beyond North Tarrytown. Mostly big farms it was when I was little.
She was born on a farm?
Yes, she was born on a farm.
And her parents were farmers?
Yes.
And what about your father's ancestry?
Well, no, grandma, my grandfather and grandmother, I was thinking when you said that, my great-grandparents were farmers. But my grandmother and grandfather lived in, after mother was born, they left the farm and they lived in Tarrytown. In Tarrytown.
In the town itself. And then your father's family were not farmers, were they?
No, they were not.
What did your grandfather do?
Oh, he worked in a store that was run by his cousin up in Ossining, New York.
And where did they come from originally? When did they come to this country?
I don't know much about grandmother and grandfather Crocker, but on the other side, mother's side, they came over with the Huguenots.
Oh, is that so? They have a French name.
Yes.
That's right. Did I ask you their names? I don't think I did. Tell me your mother's family's name.
Coutant.
That's C-O-U-T-A-N-T?
C-O-U-T-A-N-T, right? My grandfather, Coutant, went into the Civil War at 16 with his father. And it's interesting, it's always been interesting to me that he was in the Battle of Washington, and that was the only battle that Abraham Lincoln, the president, of course at that time, came and stood on the parapet watching the battle, and Grandpa saw him.
Is that so? What was your grandfather's name?
Richard Bonnet Coutant.
So it was a Huguenot
and it was, he had typhoid during the Civil War and was very, very ill, and his beautiful brown straight hair came out, snow white and curly, and it was the influence of, we always thought that Grandpa became a doctor. He became quite an eminent physician in Westchester County, New York.
Where did he study?
College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York.
Oh.
Shortly after it was opened.
It wasn't where it is now, I'm sure. Do you know where it was in New York? Yeah.
No, I don't.
Oh, I'm sure. That's a long time ago. Well, tell me something about your grandfather, Coutant. He was quite an interesting man, wasn't he?
Yeah, people call it Coutant around here.
Coutant.
but it really should be Kutan.
Mm-hmm. What, did he have some well-known patients?
Yes, it might be interesting to know, Newport people to know that he had what is now the Van Buren family, and he had the Archibalds in Westchester County as patients. And another famous person was Helen Gould.
Oh.
And Abbott Thayer, the artist, and Grandpa were very great friends. He was a patient.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to hear a little story about
Yes,
somebody else that's famous?
Certainly do.
One time the doorbell rang, and my mother happened to be carrying me in long clothes to another room, and so she was near the front door, so she decided to answer it.
How old were you at this time?
Well, I was in long clothes, so
An infant?
Yes, a very small baby, and just a few months old.
Mm-hmm.
And so a very fine-looking gentleman with a beautiful white mustache stood on the doorstep, and she said, "Oh, come right in, Mr. Clemens. The doctor isn't in just now, but I expect him any minute. So why don't you go into the parlor," of course the parlor in those days, "and sit and wait for doctor." And he said, "Fine, but would you," he says, "I love babies. Would you let me hold your baby while I'm waiting for the doctor?" My mother was a little dubious for one or another reasons, but she decided it'd be all right. And so they went into the parlor, and she put the baby in the gentleman's arms. And he was once in a while she'd go in and look and see if things were all right. She didn't hear anything, so she knew I was behaving myself. And he said, guess what, or what was, I don't know what he said exactly, but we'd say, guess what? Mm-hmm. And he said, little Helen has just put her hand up and caught her little finger in my big old mustache. And I loved it. And when Grandpa came home, he was very surprised to find what was going on. And the gentleman told him how good I had been, and that sometime he was coming again just to hold me. Mm-hmm. And, of course, by this time you guessed that Mr. Clemens was the famous Mark Twain.
Yes, that's wonderful.
I can't say it was a memory because I wasn't old enough to have memories, but the story is true, and I'm thrilled about it.
Oh, it's a wonderful.
And perhaps that's why I love Mark Twain's books extra much.
That's really.
He lived in Tarrytown and was a great friend of my grandfather's during the year and a half he lived there, and that shortly after he moved, in 1910, he died.
Yes.
Samuel Clemens.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And do you have any more interesting stories about your grandfather, who was such a very interesting man?
He drove his horses as long as he practiced, even though he did buy a car if he had to go out of town. But the horses, and one of the horses I particularly loved, I learned to drive at an very early age. And one of the horses, if he went by a house where he heard music, he stopped and danced because he had been a circus horse.
Oh, for goodness sake.
That was Daisy.
What a smart horse. Now, you told me one time that your grandfather had plans for your future.
Well, he hoped I would be a doctor, but it wasn't meant to be because I had troubles along the way, and
Well, what did he do to help you, to encourage you?
he just talked about it an awful lot.
Did he take you on any of his calls?
Oh, yes, I used to go on a few calls, but I didn't enjoy that as much as I did when he let me go in his office and when he was taking splinters out of somebody's hand or mending up a cut or something like that, and I was allowed to hold the poor patient's hand or his head or whatever, and
He insisted.
I just loved it.
He insisted you watch some sort of little operation, didn't he, that you didn't really enjoy because he wanted you not to be squeamish?
Oh, yes, he took a man's little finger off.
Oh.
And it wasn't very pleasant, and my poor mother had a fit to think that I was in there for that, but I'm glad I was.
Your family didn't live with your grandfather and
Yes,
grandmother?
we did. The first
you?
six years. 6 years we lived with Grandma and Grandpa Coutan, and then when Daddy felt that he could afford to build a house, why, he did just a block away.
In Tarrytown.
It was near enough that Grandma could wave to me out of her bedroom window to my bedroom window every day until she moved in with us.
What did your grandmother do? How many children did she have? Was she busy in the home?
Two boys, and mother was the little girl somewhat later.
Well, what sort of work did your father do when he was married?
Well, Daddy left high school when he finished his first year in high school in Tarrytown, and because he felt that he should put his older sister, he had 2 brothers and 1 sister, and he felt that Aunt Nellie wanted to become a school teacher so much, and there was very little money in the family at that time, and he decided to go to work in New York and put her through college. And so he worked for an importer of rugs, especially from Italy and from the Near East. And
do you know what company that was?
No, I don't. I don't know his daddy ever mentioned it. And he was lugging rugs and all, and one day, one of the men from one of the vice presidents from the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company came into the store, and he had a fit seeing this young man hauling rugs around when he wished to buy one. So he helped move rugs too, and he took a great fancy to my dad, and came in several times into the office. And one day he said that he had a surprise for Daddy. He had a new job for him. In the meantime, he'd questioned Daddy many things, and Daddy had told him that when he went back to New York on the train, 4 times a week, on the way home, he stopped at a lawyer's office and spent 2 to 3 hours, which was wonderful as a lawyer to do, for nothing. And Mr. Andrews, I think his name was, yes, I know it was. He was the lawyer in Tarrytown at that time, and he taught Daddy typing and shorthand, and had him work on papers and things for him so that he could sometime become a private secretary. So Daddy evidently had told the vice president of the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and so I don't remember that man's name, I'm sorry to say, but anyway, he gave Daddy a job in his office. And that was the beginning of lovely things happening. And the president, vice president raved to the president of the Metropolitan time and time again, I guess, because he wanted to take Daddy right away from the vice president and have him for himself. And I believe he did for a little while. And then the nicest thing happened was that Mr. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt of Newport fame, as well as New York, came into one of the men at the Metropolitan, and he watched Daddy, and he came several times, and apparently it was to watch Daddy more than business. And the next thing we knew, in 1905, early in 1905, he took Daddy away from the Metropolitan and made him his private secretary.
He did. Well, where did he work then? In New York?
Yes, he had a very nice little office in New York, and the office got bigger and bigger. And it was a wonderful situation. Yes, it must have, or he couldn't have gotten married.
This was before he was married.
Yes. Daddy and Mother were married in June 1905. They were married the 6th day, 6 months, 6th day, 1906 at 6 o'clock.
Well, for heaven's sake.
In their home, and Mother came down a beautiful staircase to Daddy.
You have pictures of that?
I have a picture of my mother, but not my father, on their wedding day.
You said you forgot something about your grandfather that you wanted to mention. Would you like to tell that?
Well, I was very fortunate that the Rockefeller children, he brought I can't remember if they're 4 or 6, but 5 or 6, but anyway, he brought the boys into the world. And I used to go up to the Rockefeller estate quite often on a Saturday morning to play with the children, because they had nobody except children on the estate to play with. And those were wonderful experiences. I liked Winthrop Rockefeller the best, although he didn't grow up to be the best of them, but we had much fun. And chipped my front tooth bobsledding with him. And little David was a treasure, and I held David's hand when he had his tonsils out.
Oh, for goodness sake. Do you remember?
And I also remember, I spoke before of the Van Burens here, and Mrs. Lydia Foote down on Paradise Avenue. I went to 2 of her birthday parties when I was a little girl. And one of them, she had a temper tantrum in the middle of the party and had to go to sit on a chair in another room for a while. She probably wouldn't like it that I told that, but she laughed when I told her once.
Well, we'll go back and talk about your mother and father. They were married, and did they stay in Tarrytown then?
Mother and Daddy, yes, lived in Tarrytown, yes, at Grandma's house for 6 years.
That.
And but they came up here to Newport. Mother came here as a bride in 1905, and she was quite excited because the Daddy had rented a room by mail. And the lady who wrote to him about it, she had a boarding house right across from the back of the Munchinger King. And next to I think it's a parking lot there now. And this lady raved. She wrote several letters about the beautiful view. And so they thought probably it would be near the water or near some estate or something. And the view was 4 garbage pails out the back window. And Mother never got over that.
Do you remember who the woman was?
No, I don't know. I don't know. Mother used to say who, but I don't remember. And poor Mother, Daddy was out at Oakland Farm in a lovely office in the famous riding ring.
Now, where is Oakland Farm, or was it?
It's the estate that Mrs. Young, out across from Sandy Point Avenue, and that looks like a jungle now, which is heartbreaking. It was gorgeous when they moved here, and such a beautiful place, the buildings, and they were kept so meticulously, just beautiful. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, Daddy went out by trolley each morning, and Mother had to walk the street. It sounds funny to say walk the streets, but she visited around about in stores and things. She didn't have much to do. She did a great deal of embroidery, as ladies used to do in those days, but the days were very, very lonely.
She didn't get acquainted with any local people.
They went to St. Paul's Methodist Church, and she did finally met few people, and they were very kind to her. But it was a lonesome time. The next year, they rented a nice place, and the next summer I was with them, and we lived on Arald Street in the big tan house that has wooden decorations all across the front, slats across, and they show it in almost all the slides now of Victorian houses in Newport.
I think I remember the house, but I couldn't tell you.
It's right across from this is the street that runs off of Arald there, not Francis. It's
Greenough?
Greenough Place.
It's
right at the end of Greenough Place.
It's a very large house.
Yes, it was a large house. And I learned to walk in that house. We had a maid who adored me, but every so often Maggie got a little too much, imbibed a little too much. And Daddy loved her biscuits. And he was always talking about, oh goodness, tonight Maggie says, have a bispy. So he said, I knew she'd have been someplace else.
What was Maggie's last name?
I don't know. I don't think I ever knew it. But she adored me and taught me to walk.
Is that so? Well, now you said your father took the trolley to his job. Where did the trolley go? What was the route? Do you remember?
Down Broadway.
Oh, what?
And then it would go. I've been thinking about this several times and meant to ask somebody, but it would go down. I don't know if it went along 10th Street or not, but I remember store windows so well on 10th Street. Mother used to take me to we came just summers after living in that house for that better part of that, for 9 months. But then we would rent a house each summer. Mr. Vanderbilt rented it for us, and we lived many places in Newport. But Mother took me to the beach when I was a little girl, and I remember very well going down Memorial Boulevard, and I remember I thought it was on the corner of where Spring and Spring and Broadway joined, that there was a window that had an eagle's head in that I used to be scared to pieces of until my mother took me and let me see it was just painted on glass and it wouldn't do anything to me. But we went to the beach every morning and in the summer. And one day, I remember so well, I had a doll that looked like a Campbell soup youngster, just exactly. And don't know how, but it dropped off the trolley. And I began to cry, and the conductor came to stop the trolley, and came down and asked what the trouble was. And Mother told him, and so he held the trolley car and got off and went back up the hill a little way and picked up the doll.
Wow.
So in appreciation, I named the doll Mr. Toodles, because I had been calling this conductor Mr. Toodles for no reason that no one ever knew, but it was Mr. Toodles that picked up the doll.
Well, wasn't that a wonderful thing for him to do?
Yeah, well, it really was.
Yes.
I can see him yet. Never knew his last name either. He was Mr. Toodles.
Yeah. Well, when you went down to the beach, did you go swimming, or what did you do
No, I
down there?
didn't. No, I sat in the sand, and so.
Well, your mother, of course, took care of you, and she was well occupied that way. And your father, when you came to Newport, it was because Mr. Vanderbilt was here and he had to work here. That was the reason.
That's right.
Well, then would you go back to Tarrytown?
And we always
in the
went
fall?
back to Tarrytown.
Well,
and then he went back to his office in New York each day.
Did he ever have time to do anything besides his work when you were here or at home?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, he always had good times with us. Daddy was... his friends would say, "Why don't you learn to play golf with us, Charlie, or play tennis and so on?" And Daddy said, "No, because I'm in New York so much of the time, or in my office so much of the time, that when I get out, my time belongs to my family." He used to say my girls, before her brother came along.
Well, now, speaking of your brother, when was he born? Much after you?
6 years and 8 months.
Oh.
And I didn't think much of the whole procedure.
I'm sure you didn't. Well, when did you learn to accept him?
He was sick, and I stood by the crib watching him while Mother went to get a bottle for him, and he put his little hand up and took hold of my little finger and put it in his mouth, and he won me over. Hook, line, and sinker.
Oh, that's nice. Well, when he got older, did you play together, or was there too much distance?
Well, my brother, unfortunately, was afflicted with asthma terribly, and Mother did most of the teaching of brother through the grades, not high school, but the grades, and Mother never got over it. He was A1 for the draft in World War II, but he was very miserable as a little boy.
That's too bad. Well, when you came to Newport, did you meet a lot of children? Did you have playmates?
No, we lived on Powell Avenue several years in Mrs. Cousin's boarding house, about halfway down Powell Avenue. And there were some children next door, but they acted so awful to their mother and father that I didn't want to play with them. And fortunately, I was taught to not to ask ever, "What'll I do now, Mommy?" And I always found things to do. I loved to read, and I learned to read very early. And I loved, I just don't remember, we went to the beach every morning, it didn't rain. And Mrs. Cousins, one thing I remember about Mrs. Cousins' house, our trunk was in the back on a balcony, and when I was bad, I had to sit on the trunk always. It's funny what we remember, isn't it?
It certainly is. Well, eventually your family came to live in Newport, didn't they? I thought they moved here.
Yes, they moved. We moved here in 1932.
Now, how did that happen?
Because, of course, we didn't speak about it, but Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt on May the 7th, I think, the Lusitania went down, and the telephone call came while we were at supper, and it was the first time I had ever seen Daddy cry. But anyway, and we were told by the person who let Daddy know that Mr. Vanderbilt had drowned, that he had given his life preserver. And he had given it to we learned later, to a Mr. Laureate of Boston. And Mr. Laureate was a book dealer. And he used to come down to Newport to see Daddy in his office very often. And he always told him how grateful he was for Mr. Vanderbilt giving him his life, but how terrible he had also felt, always. So I think it's quite interesting.
Yes.
I haven't seen him in many years. I don't know if he's still living or not, but he used to be quite a frequent visitor to see Daddy.
What was his first name? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Did he live in Newport?
No, he lived in Boston.
In Boston.
He was a book dealer in Boston.
Yes, I see.
And so Daddy then, after Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt had gone, and I'd like to tell something I forgot to tell about Mr. Vanderbilt, proving how marvelous he was when Daddy went to work with him.
Of course.
One day he came into Daddy's office here in Portsmouth, and showing how observant he was at all times and how such a fine gentleman. He said, incidentally, he never would call Daddy Charles or Charlie. It was always Mr. Crocker. He told him that when he engaged him, that he would be Mr. Crocker. And he didn't like familiarity with the ones that he worked with. And he said, I've noticed, Mr. Crocker, that you're a teetotaler whenever you've come to our parties, and every single party that we have, you will receive an invitation, because we always want you at our parties. And your wife, too, if she will come. So he said, I've noticed this about you, and this morning I told the butler that hereafter, whenever you were at one of the parties or gatherings of any kind, that he was to put at the left-hand side of the tray something that did not have liquor in it for you and your wife, too, if she was there. But if your wife was there, her glass would be at the right-hand side, the second one, so that you would never feel that you were picked out or anything for some difference.
How far?
Now, wasn't that... After Mr. Vanderbilt was lost on the Lusitania, Mrs. Vanderbilt asked if the former Margaret Emerson asked if Daddy would please stay with her. And this he did, and we still came to Newport in the summers, and still had the office and the riding ring. until Mrs. Emerson remarried.
Now, excuse me just a minute. You talk about the office and the writing room. Tell me just where that was, will you?
The writing room was behind the main house.
Now, where was the main house?
At Oakland Farm was beautiful colonial, way back to the Revolution. Was set in, there was a long drive in with white stones, gorgeous. Now it's a jungle, sad to say. And then you turned left and you'd see the beautiful colonial house, and behind it was what they called a riding ring, where Daddy had his office. And in front of the house for many years was a beautiful English maze of shrubbery. And twice I got lost in it. And many other people did too. It really was a labyrinth.
Well, now, was this in Portsmouth?
Yes.
Can you describe to me just where in Portsmouth?
Across from Sandy Point Avenue.
You mentioned that.
And the East Main Road.
Oh, yes. All right. Now I have it straight.
Mm-hmm. And
so
the riding ring had a tower, and Daddy's 2 towers for guests when they brought their breakfast to them from the main house, and the rest of the time they ate with the family, but breakfast they could eat when they wanted. And Daddy's office was in one of the towers, a round office. It was fascinating.
I suppose you visited.
Yes, and the riding ring, so many times around was a mile, and I used to roller skate around the riding ring on the hardwood floors.
It was hardwood floor?
And I used to ride the balcony, and I used to ride a bicycle, my brother and I, up in the balcony too. And it was beautiful at Oakland Farm, just beautiful. And whenever there was a party, the trees were all lighted near the house. And the stables were out of this world. And again at a party, they always had a sand painter come, and in front of every box stall of the famous Vanderbilt horses, a painting was made on the floor. And they were beautiful. And when the party was over, some of the people would come back and gather up the sand and take it off.
You mean they made a picture with sand?
Yeah, they made these little paintings all along in front of the box stalls.
Was it colored?
Yes, colored sands.
How did they make the color, do you know?
No, I don't know, but they had color sands, and they were just beautiful.
Oh, and
Daddy always had a man come up from New York to do it.
Did they ever take any pictures of those?
I don't recall, probably.
But this was a special artist who did this
sand painting.
My goodness.
They always, and the trees, I spoke of the lights, the trees had many balloons in them always.
Beautiful.
And I never went to any of those parties, but sometimes Mrs. Vanderbilt, the second Mrs. Vanderbilt, Ann Colby, she would, no, that was Bill's, that's another story. We've been talking about Alfred Vanderbilt.
How many horses were there?
I think at one time they had 16, but I wouldn't want anybody to go around telling that they had 16 horses. But of course they had the 5 coach horses, the dapple grays, that pulled the venture coach that ran between London and Brighton until Mr. Vanderbilt bought it from them over in England and had it shipped over here. And they kept the name, the Venture. And the horses were always gray, dapple gray. And their names were always, if they had a replacement, and they were given the same name: Venture, Viking, Vanity, and Vogue. And then the horse, of course, the post horse was Vulcan, all V's for Vanderbilt. And you only took, if you were going out of town, a post horse was taken, but not in town, because you could get a replacement if something happened. One time I was driving driving the four horses, and one of the horses dropped dead. I went to the autopsy that afternoon, and the horse had peritonitis, just exactly like a person might have it.
My goodness.
And
now, you were telling me something about Margaret Emerson Vanderbilt, and she asked your father to stay with her.
Yes, and he did until she married Raymond Baker. And Raymond Baker did not want Mr. Charles Edward Crocker around. He wanted to manage the affairs.
Well, your father was doing more than just being a secretary. He was a real manager, was he?
He did lots of things. It all had to do with the money end of it and things like that. Mm-hmm. But, and the help, he engaged the help for the Vanderbilt family. Mm-hmm. And did a great deal about getting the people for the parties, doing things. And when I was older, I had the privilege of, was considered a privilege of doing all the invitations, because I wrote manuscript, and Mrs. Vanderbilt liked it so much. I did all the invitation for years for the parties. And of course, Daddy would not let me accept anything for doing this. And as I got older, I didn't want to anyway. Mm-hmm. But she would always give me some beautiful gift in appreciation.
Do you remember any certain gifts she gave you?
Oh, so often they were handbags. Uh-huh. And sometimes it was a dress. And she was very good to me. Well,
so when your father lost that job, what happened to him then?
He went with Marwick Mitchell. Now it's Pete Marwick Mitchell. And
how do you spell Marwick?
I noticed it's written in the Newport Daily News now. You read it quite often. But it was just Marwick Mitchell.
How do you spell Marwick?
M-A-R-W-I-C-K, Marwick Mitchell Company, and in New York, and he was secretary to the president of that. And I think it's very, I often think of it and told my teachers when I would talk with them about how they should behave and so forth for interviews. Daddy went to interview for this job that he had seen an advertisement in the New York Times, and he was one of 17 or 19. I don't remember just which gentlemen that were sitting in a row on chairs waiting for interviews, and an elderly gentleman came through the office door, and it proved to be Mr. Mitchell, and I think it was Mitchell, and he walked down the aisle, and he went out the door, and in a few minutes he came back, and he looked down, smiled at the men, and went into his office again, and in less time than it takes to tell it, he came out and he walked over to the lady, and that was the stenographer that was in the office, and he said that he would like to see such and such a man. and the man with the blue necktie, and others in a blue shirt, and it was Daddy. And he took him in, and in less than a half an hour's time, Daddy had the job. And he said, "Do you know why I said for you?" And he said, "Of the men that were sitting out there, you were the only one that smiled when I went through, and you were the only one that I noticed wasn't playing with his hands or chewing gum or something else. And there were very few of those men out there that did not have their two legs wound around the legs of the chair. And I would never hire anyone that did that."
How interesting.
And as I say, I used to tell my teachers about that because it is true. No superintendent, that's in his right mind would want somebody that's doing contortions while they're waiting.
Very good.
But Daddy had impressed it upon us kids so much that first impressions are what stick and what help you along.
Well, how long did he work for that company?
I think it was a year and a half. I don't remember because Mr. The head gentleman that Daddy worked for, and I can't remember whether it was Mr. Mitchell or Mr. I'm sure it was. He 2 different fall in the fall of the year, he invited Daddy and me to go to West Point to a football game. And so it must have been, he was with him at least 2 autumns. But I think it was about a year and 3/4. I should know. I should have looked it up.
Well, why did he leave them?
Because Mrs. Fitzsimmons, Paul Fitzsimmons, here in Newport, sent for Daddy and told him that her son, William H. Vanderbilt, was to be 21 years old in November, and she wanted to give Bill the finest birthday present she could possibly think of, because at that time he was going to take over the estate and out at Oakland Farm and live there, and she would no longer have anything to do with it. And so she said, "I want you, Mr. Crocker, to be Bill's secretary. Nothing could make me happier. But at the same time, I will give you," it must have been in the spring of the year, because she said she would give him three months to think it over. And in the meantime, Daddy had the Post family and also another prominent family that I don't recall who had recently asked Daddy if he would come with them. So he wanted to look into all 3 situations. And then he thought of Alfred Gwynne, and he said, "I just couldn't let Bill." And she said, "I know that you'll be like another father to Bill. And he knows nothing about it." So when it came time for Daddy said he would go with Bill. And when the birthday came along, she had him, they had an apartment in New York at that time. And
Who? You mean your mother?
Fitzsimmons.
Oh, the Fitzsimmons.
Mrs. Fitzsimmons. And she had a big card made with "Happy Birthday, Bill" on it. And she had a big bow tied on Daddy, red bow. And she presented Daddy to Bill. Isn't that fun?
Yes, it was quite a party.
Yes. And
what year was that? Do you remember?
I should have looked up these things. It must have been 1930 or 31, because in 1932, Mr. Vanderbilt, of course, we children and mother did not call him Bill, but he was always to be Bill. He'd given Daddy, he wanted to be Bill, always. And he was interested in began to be interested in the short line. And he wondered if Daddy would mind having a office. He didn't know whether it would be in Providence or in Newport. And to tell the truth, the family would like to have been in Providence, or at least we thought we would have. And we rented a house as usual for the summer of 1932.
In Newport or Providence?
In Newport. And toward the end of the summer, Bill Vanderbilt had decided he wanted Daddy to be in Newport. And he opened an office for him where the short line over the cafeteria, what became a cafeteria downstairs on the mall.
Let me ask you, what is the short line?
Short line bus company.
Oh.
Because Bill had bought it out. He was the owner of the bus company, and so Daddy was given to understand he had nothing to do with the bus company at all. And when Mr. Vanderbilt went into politics, Daddy gave him to understand he wanted nothing to do with politics either. And so he always continued as secretary.
Where did the short line run?
Like it does now, to Providence and to on
you
this
mean
island.
That's the RIPTA of today, the Rhode Island
Yes, it used to be the
system?
short line bus company.
I see.
Before you moved here, I guess.
Oh yes, it was. But that's the public transportation company
the
of
only
today.
probably after the trolley cars gave up, then the
I see.
Incidentally, I thought of something else I should have told you.
All right.
Daddy had the first Buick car in Newport. Mr. Vanderbilt went to the one week to the Syracuse Fair, and the Buick people got after him and got him to buy a little Buick runabout with what's now a rumble seat in the back, and just room for two in the front, and the tire, great big thing on the side, and much brass, and very classy. And when it was delivered from the Syracuse, after the fair was over, about a month later, it was delivered to Oakland Farm. And Mr. Vanderbilt sent for Daddy to come and see it. And he said, now, I don't think much of this, but you know how people get you to buy things. And he said, I might drive it sometime, but I doubt it. But I want you to feel free to learn to drive it and drive it back and forth to work, because I know you come on the trolley car, and I wouldn't ride on that trolley car for anything. So one day Daddy was kind of scary about it. Mother didn't think he should learn, and so on. And one day the carpenter that was working there had to go to town to get something, and Daddy always came home for lunch because he had a long lunch hour, and Mother was alone. And the carpenter inveigled Daddy to, who never had a lesson, neither had the carpenter, to drive the little Buick into town. And he was going to stay in town, and Daddy was coming back, so he would drive in town, and Daddy would drive back. And they never had a minute's trouble about it.
They didn't.
And and so that was the kind of, we were so proud of our father.
I'm sure, and nobody taught him. Was it easy to operate? I suppose it was.
Oh, yes, it was, I guess.
Oh. Well, now, when you moved to Newport to live, where did you and your family live?
Oh, we were, that summer, that summer we were living with, we decided not to lease a house that summer, but to take the second floor of what was Mrs. Lyons' house, where the kitchen potpourri at Middletown Corners there now is.
Lions?
Mrs. Lyons.
Uh-huh.
And we lived with her that summer on the second floor, and she had tourists on the rooms we didn't take and up on the third floor. And we had a very, very pleasant summer. And and then the next summer was when we were going to move either to Providence or to Newport. And that spring, Mother and Daddy came up and stayed with Mrs. Lyons just to look around house hunting. And it so happened that Mrs. Cowie, Mrs. Lyons' sister, Edith Cowie, and her husband, Felix, who at that time owned the Milepost, out where the Newport Savings Bank now is, in Middletown. And he owned a very nice restaurant. And she said they lived down on Dudley Avenue, just below the Lyons cottage. And she offered us the house for the summer. And if we had to move to Newport, we could continue to live in it if we wished. Because they had bought a house out around Tuckerman Avenue. And that's where the Lees live now. And Mrs. Cowie, who's long since been a widow, she has a home built on that property. And it so happened that in the fall, in August, Mr. Vanderbilt told Daddy that he hoped you wouldn't mind. It would be in Newport, the office, not in Providence. And by that time, we were thrilled to pieces. And so we lived in that house 30 years. And somewhere along the line, we bought it. And one of the funniest things happened was they had several chairs that were exactly the same style as ours. Their dishes were identical with our set. And there were, I don't know how many things showing our tastes were almost identical.
Oh, how interesting.
And it was interesting. So when we moved our furniture from Tarrytown, and that came up on the weekend that the banks were closed all around.
Oh, that was during the Depression.
Yes, during the Depression. And that was one reason Mr. Vanderbilt wanted us up this way instead of running extra Newport. He said he felt kind of guilty having an office in Newport, New York, too, at that time. And so and then I began to feel that something happened to Mother and Daddy. I could never swing that big house and all, and so that's why I built out here at Slate Hill Farm when it first opened.
How big was the house that you had on Dudley?
Dr. Corellis owns it now. It's big enough for 6 children.
Oh.
6 or 7.
What was the address?
24 Dudley Avenue. And Dr. Arthur Dring built a house next door, and it was just wonderful because they were marvelous neighbors.
Who else did you have as neighbors? Were there children for you to
Judge
play with?
Corellis lived across the street, and Mrs. Cornelius Murphy lived up one door, and she later became one of my teachers in Middletown, and for a while. And I can't think of the name of the Greek gentleman that owned a lot of land here. He lived next door to us. I could never understand him, but Mother and Daddy did.
Mm-hmm. Well, then your family had quite a few friends among the neighborhood.
Oh, yes, we were all neighborly.
Uh-huh. That's nice.
No fuss and muss.
Uh-huh.
The bottom of Dudley Avenue wasn't open. Dr. Drink's house was the last one down there then.
Oh.
And then the lower part was opened.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess there weren't a great many houses at that time.
No, there were not.
Mm-hmm. Nice
We were
open
very
space.
cross when the car, up at the car folks, the Olds, I think it's the Olds, I don't look there very often. Well, anyway, that they opened their car place at the head of the street, but we got used to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, you mentioned Mr. William Vanderbilt. What relationship was he to Alfred Gwynne? Was he his son?
His son.
I see.
His mother was Mrs. Fitzsimmons, had become Mrs. Fitzsimmons.
Yes. Uh-huh, I see.
And Alfred had, as I said, had married Margaret Emerson.
Uh-huh. And this office that your father then worked in Newport, I think you told me, but tell me again, where was it?
So it was what is now the Yesterday's restaurant.
Oh,
it was
yes.
up over that.
On Washington Square?
Yes, it used to be a cafeteria down there, and then now it's Yesterday's.
Oh, I see.
Still, I guess, like a cafeteria.
Uh-huh.
And then Daddy left that office and went up to the Vernon house. And we used to tea on the corner of where is the one that goes through where the artillery hangs forth?
Spring?
No, the one below Spring.
Clark Street.
Clark Street.
Clark Street and Mary.
Corner of Mary Street, Clark Street and Mary Street was the Vernon house.
That's where your father worked.
And then he had a very nice office in that house.
Oh.
Is it on? Mm-hmm. And we used to tease him and say that he did more about the tourists, taking them around the Vernon house and discovering that there were murals in the Vernon house and so forth and so on, and he did doing his work, but I guess he really didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But the family service was also in the Vernon house, and they just loved Daddy, and he had a great time hobnobbing with them, too.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very happy situation.
Well, you were going to tell me something else about Mr. William Vanderbilt, weren't you? Something that happened earlier when he was young.
Mr. William Vanderbilt's first wife was Emily Davies. And Emily Davies was Freddie Davies' only daughter. And he was Mr. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt's best friend. And they had played together so much as children and all, and it just didn't work out as man and wife. And so they got mutual consent, they got a divorce, and then in time he married Ann Colby, and everybody loved Ann. And, of course, I didn't call her that. But Daddy was asked to call her that, and so I heard it all the time at home. So that's why I call her that now. And sometimes Mrs. Vanderbilt, I think this is funny, sometimes Mrs. Vanderbilt, Ann Colby, would call up on a Sunday morning, and she would say, Mrs. Crocker, she said, you know, we bought too much meat, really, for dinner, and we wish you folks would come out and have dinner with us and help us eat it up.
Oh, nice. And they were very congenial people.
Oh, they were wonderful people. And I feel so badly that Bill's no longer alive, but he felt so much at home and loved Daddy so dearly that if he was going away or anything, he'd always kiss him goodbye.
Is that so?
And Anne Vanderbilt, Daddy and Daddy used to say, "Guess who I saw? I got a big hug and kiss today. Guess who I saw?" to my mother. And she'd say, "Anne Vanderbilt in the bank, I'll bet you." And it was. She just adored Daddy.
Well, did she just come across him in the bank? He wasn't working in the bank.
Oh, no. He just Daddy'd be in there doing business, and she'd happen to come in many times, it seemed, when he was there. Emily Vanderbilt, named for her mother, was the only child by Emily Davies and Bill Vanderbilt. And she was very young when they got the divorce, and we were all so thankful when Bill married again and had the twins and Bill Jr., because Emily needed much more of a home life than she had at that time.
What was the other twins' name?
The twins were Anne and Elsie.
Oh, I see.
And they were Mrs. Ann Colby's Vanderbilt's and Bill's youngsters.
Well, let's go back to your life now. You were growing up in Newport, and in Middletown. You were living in Middletown.
No, we lived in Newport. It was the last house in Newport when we moved here.
Oh, it was in Newport. I see.
It was the last house down there.
That was the house on Dudley.
Yeah.
I see. I was thinking Middletown. All right. You lived there, and in the meantime...
But then when you...
Well, I'd like to ask you now something about your education. Of course, when you first started school, you were still living in Tarrytown. Now, where did you go to school there?
I had no playmates when I lived at Grandma's house, and so there were two young ladies that had decided to open a little private school in Tarrytown, and one was going to have the kindergarten, and one was going to have the first grade. And so Mother and Daddy felt that I should be with other children. I was only 4 at that time, and there was a hesitancy on the part of Miss Diggs, Miss Sheridan, as the kindergarten teacher, whether I was too young to go, but she said that she decided she'd love to have me. So I went there for kindergarten, and I also had my first grade there with the other teacher, Miss Diggs. And, I still remember so well the children that I played with in those days, and it's many, many, many years ago. And I like to tell about that, being at that school, because these two young ladies that started this little school, I have always marveled, as I trained to be a teacher many years later, that they saw so far into the future. No one in those days were going on excursions, and no one brought things in from home they wanted to teach the other children about because they enjoyed them. And I could really go on and on about Miss Diggs and Miss Sheridan. Well, Mother and Daddy decided that to go into the second grade, I better go to public school and get acquainted with people more in my neighborhood and around about. So I entered I went to the second grade, and in a week's time, they had shoved me into the 3rd grade. I'm so glad there's very, very little of skipping of grades nowadays, because I handled the 3rd grade beautifully, if I do say so. And then I had not been in the 2nd grade because I was put in the 3rd. And then the next thing, I skipped the 4th, and that was a terrible mistake, as anyone nowadays would tell. And that's why I've always been miserable in mathematics. Although I get along, but it certainly was a bad thing. And also, I was in all the other grades with people really 2 years older than I, so that I couldn't go to college. I was too young when I graduated, and that was not good. So I took a PG course, postgraduate, and took things that I hadn't had a chance to take. Mm-hmm. But
well, let me ask you.
It was awful.
Yes, I can understand that. But let me ask you why you were so far. Of course, you were very intelligent. But did your family teach you at home a great deal? Did your mother teach you to read, or did your father? How did you get so far ahead?
No, but I picked up these 2 people when I went into school, and of course, Miss Sheridan used to put me in into the 1st grade once in a while, so that I got a smattering of reading then, and then picked it up at home a great deal.
Your family, your
mother. Daddy was a great reader.
I see.
And my brother having asthma, Mother was not a school teacher, but she was next door to it because of my brother. She taught him almost all up to high school, with the teachers in the school help, of course, do this and do that. But so that I've always loved to read. But sad to say, I'm a very slow reader because I won't read every word. Nobody does that.
Well, when you were in school in Tarrytown, did you like certain things better than others, certain courses?
Well, I was an awful tomboy.
Where are you?
That's tomboy part started right in my neighborhood because we lived across the street. When we had our own home on Elizabeth Street, we lived across from the side of the Baptist church. Incidentally, the Rockefeller family attended that Baptist church. And right down across from the front of the Baptist church was a beautiful Christ Episcopal church where Washington Irving had attended.
Yes,
so, there were 21 trees in the Baptist backyard of the Baptist church, and at least 19 of them I might have almost called my home, because when anybody wanted me, they'd go over and look up in the trees or blow a police whistle for me to come down out of the trees. There was nothing I wouldn't climb. And Daddy wasn't sure whether he had a little girl or a little boy. And another thing that I used to do, even though Mother was a great believer of spankings, not only with a hand but the hairbrush. And I was very naughty at times, and I loved to jump through bonfires if I found any. And Mother came along one day when I was doing that, and boy, did I catch it. So
you never caught fire.
I know, I never caught fire. Yes, I've been on fire, but it wasn't from my doings in the bonfires along the street, fortunately. But I was always jumping over hedges, and I had mostly boys to play with at that time, and I learned to roller skate when I was not quite 4, and I wish I still could do it because I loved it. Mm-hmm.
Well, when you came to live in Newport, what grade were you in?
Oh, I graduated from Washington Irving High School in Tarrytown, New York.
Oh, you were already in your teens.
Yes,
then.
I was in my teens, and I went to normal school from there.
Now, what do you mean by normal school?
That's what they used to call the now College of Education. Everywhere it's called.
Oh.
And it used to be the good old normal school. And when you say that, boy, that dates you. But I had wanted to go to Cornell to become a doctor, and we'd signed up for pre-med, but unfortunately I had an accident when I was counselor at school and was burned badly, and I don't have any feeling in 3 fingers of my left hand, and therefore nobody wanted women weren't training much to be doctors anyway, and they didn't want somebody that didn't have 2 good hands. So my next choice was, well, I might as well go and become a teacher. And am I glad? The Lord certainly had a hand in that, because no one could have loved their teaching career more than I did. And again, I was fortunate enough to go to a school that wasn't so big, but what we had individual attention, and the faculty were our friends, not just our teachers. And dormitory life I adored. And my roommate, we're still the best of friends, and we had the same birthday. Wasn't that strange?
It certainly was.
And so that was up near Rochester, New York, in Geneseo.
Oh, it was. Now, what was the name of it?
Geneseo State Normal School.
Was that? It was a state.
Yes, state
school.
normal school.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my arm in a sling the first year of Geneseo, and but everybody was so good to me, I really wouldn't have hardly known it.
Was that because you burned your hand?
Yes, it was because of all the trouble with the left hand. And from camp days, when I was counselor and taught sealing wax craft.
Oh.
That was the trouble. And so when I finished normal school, why, I felt I wanted to go to teach very, very much immediately, but I felt that I might get so engrossed in teaching that I would not go further. At normal school in those days was only 3 years.
3 years. And how
and
old
when
were
it
you?
became a teacher's education, why then it was, I was 20 when I got, not quite 20 when I got out. And, because I had to hang around. But I decided to go to Albany and get my Bachelor of Science degree immediately, and then I would have it.
Well, that was the University of New York?
Now it's the University of New York. See, they were normal schools first, and then they were colleges of education, and now they are, what was it you said?
Universities.
Yes,
well,
they're all state universities now.
Yeah, well, it was the Albany...
It was the New York State College for Teachers.
In Albany.
Yes, in Albany. For the 1 year. I loathed it.
Did you?
I loathed every minute of it.
What, did you have to learn a lot of those education things that are so
Well, I don't know. It was a lot of... I majored in psych, and that I adored, psychology. But the other stuff... and there was... The trouble, the reason for it, I am sure, was because Geneseo was such a friendly place, and maybe 400 students. And there were 1,200 and some in Albany, and it was in the middle of the city. Since then it's moved out. and to the outskirts. But there was nothing that I loved there, except the school doctor thought it'd be nice if the girls roller skated to class because we didn't get enough exercise, and so I was in seventh heaven roller skating to class.
That sounds like great fun, except in the middle of the winter. You know how cold Albany is.
Yes, well, it was fall and spring, I have to admit.
Oh, I see. We overlooked a couple of things I wanted you to tell me about. That one had to do with Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish. Would you tell that story?
Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish used to live in the Crossways, which has been made apartment houses, and I guess Mr. Chaudier, yes, he owned it at the end, didn't he?
No, he didn't.
No? Oh.
The David Reed family owns it.
Oh, well, anyway, it's that house across from one
Yes.
that was. I'm glad you knew the answer to that, because I really didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that you took a train over to Wickford Junction if you were going to go to New York or part south.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go to Kingston. You went to Wickford Junction.
Mm-hmm.
And you took the ferry, of course, from Newport over to Jamestown, and then Jamestown over to Saunderstown.
Mm-hmm.
And one day we were leaving to go back home to New York, because we used to have to, in those days, try to go by the train. And before Daddy got another car.
Yes.
And Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish was sitting with her, she did have a car, with her chauffeur, and they were talking very, very friendly fashioned, and all of a sudden the chauffeur said, that baby over there, pointing to me, Mrs. Fish, do you think it's a boy or a girl? I didn't have much hair at that time, but that was probably the reason. And in my picture, I had a funny cap on, so I guess it did look sort of like a boy. But there was lace on the coat, so he should have known better. But Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish did not go by the way I looked. And she said the man's name, and she said, why, of course it's a girl. Haven't you heard her talk? And of course she has to be a girl. And Mother and Daddy laughed out loud, and Mrs. Fish, then she came over. I came over and wanted to shake hands with the little girl. So, and I really shouldn't have said it because I was smart, because she told the man, don't you realize she's so SMART, she has to be a little girl. I lost a lot of it.
No, I don't think so.
I would say that.
Another thing I want you to tell about is your experiences with the Vanderbilt horses and coaches. And when did that happen?
Well, I learned to drive the horses. I really don't know, because it was so far back. It was at Oakland Farm, and one day Mr. William H. Vanderbilt, it was right after Daddy went with him, came into the office, and he said, don't you think that Helen would like to ride and drive the horses? She's out here every day, and it's must be rather boring, and I would love to have her learn to ride and drive if she cares to. Mm-hmm. And of course, Helen L. was mighty excited, and so we tried the riding first in the riding ring, and I had a horse that was immense. His name was Captain Onward.
Oh.
And it was a long time before I realized, they told me he had an artificial tail. his tail had been in some accident and had to be removed, and he had a beautiful artificial tail. Therefore, he could not be one of the horses that were in the horse show. But I did learn to ride him. He was immense, and he was beautiful.
You weren't at all afraid?
No. And I also took lessons to learn more quickly over Walker's riding school at that time.
Where was that?
And over on Third Beach Road. Well, you turn off on the street. I can't remember the name of that one either. But I used to go over there 3 times a week also. And then the fellows also were teaching me at Oakland Farm. But unfortunately, very unfortunately, I could not keep up the riding of horses. It was heartbreaking, but there was too much jogging around and so forth, and I had to give that up entirely. And so I turned my love to the coach horses and all the other horses that would pull anything. And there were, in the carriage house, there were many beautiful carriages. Vis-a-vis were a tiny coach where you sat, just held 4 people and you faced each other. And of course, I thought the coach was gorgeous, still do. And
now, when you say the coach, do you mean
the Venture?
Yes.
The Venture.
The one that had been in England?
Yes. And there was a smaller red coach, but what I learned to drive with was the brake, which is a skeleton coach. And the coachman was Mr. Kennedy, and he certainly knew how to teach Miss Helen. And
now, Mr. Kennedy was
the coachman.
Yes, was
the
he
head
from
coachman.
Island?
He was from New York,
oh.
And he had been with many wealthy families. But Mr. Vanderbilt got hold of him and made it possible that he be his coachman. He was an Englishman. Unfortunately, in the end, he committed suicide in New York after he became an old man. But he was from Ireland, right from Ireland, and what a brogue. But his mother was English and his father was Irish, he was always telling me. So I learned to harness the different ones, the buggy and the surrey and the jaunting cart and the coach and the several other different types of carriages.
They
also
certainly had an array.
Carry-all, and they were kept so beautifully. Oh, they were beautiful.
How many staff did they have to take care of those things?
I would say they must have had 4 stable men and the head coachman, and several of them would be quite young. And so I'm still nowadays told we used to see you, Helen, when you were driving that ugly-looking brake around town. And
well, now, were you in your teens at this time?
Yes, I was in my teens and into the 20s. And I would drive the coach on at least once a week. And I'm very thrilled at any time. Many times Mr. Vanderbilt invited me to ride on the coach when it was going to be in a horse show or in the county fair or something like that. And there was a certain young lady in town that was among the Vanderbilt friends, it was very put out because she wanted to have the seat of honor. But if I was riding on the coach, I had the seat of honor. And it meant more than I could say.
Oh, I'm sure.
I am so sorry that I exhibited pictures in some sort of a thing down at some fair in Newport during those years, and someone went off with I have only one picture of the coach, which is heartbreaking, but I can see it in my mind because I have a fabulous memory, and I can even smell it because I have a big nose. And anyhow, I did drive the coach, the smaller coach, in the county fair one year.
Now, where was that?
Held out on the fairgrounds where the roller skate rink has been until recently.
Portsmouth?
Out on Portsmouth,
Uh-huh.
yes.
Yes.
And
Now, where did you drive the coach when you were driving?
I drove on the main streets, and I'm very proud that well, I'm sure it hasn't changed because they don't drive around. Back then, I was the only woman who had ever driven alone around Ocean Drive.
You did?
But one day, the coachman said, "Someday, Miss Helen, I'm going to stop you down here across from the city hall, and I am going to disappear. And you are to drive down through the square, up Turo Street, along Bellevue Avenue. Mr. Vanderbilt has given me permission to have you do this. In fact, he suggested it. And around Ocean Drive. And somewhere around the Perry Estate, which is where they built those horrible houses on Ocean Drive now, those cement things.
Oh, yes.
I will appear and be with you the remainder of the trip back to Oakland Farm. But you can guess how my tummy rattled and everything else and all. But it happened one day. Mr. Kennedy jumped off the coach and said, "Good luck, Miss Helen," and disappeared somewhere. And I was, of course, and Daddy too, were thrilled to smithereens to think that I could do it, and I didn't have a bit of trouble. And it's one of the happiest memories in my life, of course.
Of course. Now, this
and I was thrilled to think Muriel Vanderbilt Church never drove the coach around Ocean Drive, I know. And Mrs. She was the lady on Gibbs Avenue who drove her coach, but she never drove alone at all, I believe.
Well, now, this was a team of 4 horses, wasn't it?
4 horses.
Wasn't that?
Venture, Viking, Vanity, and Vogue, as I said once before, were their names. And, the harness was always kept shining bright and everything so beautiful. And
well, now, there's a special technique I've heard to driving a team of horses that's really difficult. How did you manage?
Yes, and with only 2 fingers on one hand, too.
Yes. Now, they have, what are the leaders? The 2 front,
the 2 front ones,
the
yes,
leaders and the wheelers.
And the wheelers,
and
right.
What do you do with the leaders and the wheelers?
Just keep the reins so that they both keep even at all times.
To manage
so that they won't go ahead at all. And, when Newport has every few years the coach,
yes, and
someone drives the Venture, the tears roll down my cheeks.
Oh, I imagine.
It was so beautiful with dapple grays.
Now, you also drove other coaches or vehicles, and did you ever drive tandem?
Yes, I drove tandem, not on the streets. I drove tandem in the fair once.
Now, tell what tandem is.
tandem is one horse, only one horse ahead of the other instead of two horses ahead of two horses.
That's very difficult, isn't it?
And no, it's much easier than the four.
Oh, is it?
Yes, it is. And it's the little joining cart that they use it with the joining cart, and sulky you use only one horse for the big wheels.
Did you ever drive what I think they call tricorn?
Yes, right. I've driven that 3. That is hard. That is quite hard. I've driven along Wapping Road, all around Wapping Road and Forest Avenue. There weren't enough streets in Middletown. You had to do the same thing. And I drove 3 horses over to, quite a number of times we went over to a farm just over the old stone bridge in Tiverton to one of Mr. Vanderbilt's friends. And I drove over there for some sort of a to-do. I think the man wanted to show his children the tricorn, and because I drove a Surrey over there one time alone and took out. They were having a party for the children, and we gave them Surrey rides. I did that. I remember.
Well, now when you did your momentous drive around Ocean Drive.
Yes, and once when I was in the hospital, Newport Hospital one time in the winter, a nurse came in and she said, "Read this, Miss Crocker." And she showed me something in the grist mill, and it said that, "Is there anyone that can tell me who the young lady was who used to drive the Vanderbilt coach around Newport?" And I have not been able to find out. And I blushed. I got very, very red. And the nurse said, "Are you all right, Miss Crocker? Are you all right?" And I said, "Oh, yes, but it was I that did it." And the nurse nearly dropped dead. And I couldn't believe it. And so Daddy asked me the next day, oh no, he called up then and there because they discovered it in the paper too, and asked if I would minded if Daddy wrote a letter or went to see the girl and told her about things.
Well, I was going to ask you, when you did that marvelous drive, were there a lot of people watching? Was there a big audience?
No, it was just daily life in Newport.
Nobody really noticed.
There were people, yes, they noticed. Look at the lady driving a coach. And I can see the lady's big hats. It was back in the days of the big hats along Bellevue Avenue. And yes, I can see that. And of course, this year the stables are not open down there on Spring Street, and I miss it because as long as the coach was kept in there, I had permission to climb. The only person that had permission to climb up on the coach if I wished to do so. And I never went in to show my friends the stables unless I climbed up on the coach and showed it could be done.
Well, let's pick up again now. Back in your school days, you finished in school in Albany, and then you had your teaching.
Yes, and I forgot. Is it on?
Yes.
I forgot to say that my diploma was handed to me by Eleanor Roosevelt in Albany because Franklin Roosevelt was governor of the state at that time. And that's always been fun to have that as a memory. And she handed them out to the first 20 in the class.
Is that so? And shook your hand.
Oh, yeah, she shook it, and she had a good hand clasp, not a wet cabbage leaf one.
And when you had graduated, what did you do then?
Well, I was in Albany, and I thought I would like to continue in New York State and teach. And so I decided to apply several places around Albany. And my first choice was Schenectady, New York, where the GE was. And I thought I'd like to teach in a large place. So I interviewed the superintendent, and I'll never forget it because he said, "What salary would you expect, Miss Crocker?" And I said, well, on a level with others who do not have, of course, this experience. And he said, well, we're going to give, you've gotten your degree and all, and so we will give you, they're beginning at $1,100 in Schenectady, and we're going to give you $1,350 for starting. And I clapped my hands and I said, "Oh, goody!" And always after, while I was in Schenectady, the superintendent would come and say, "Good morning, Miss Goody," very quietly to me. But he never forgot it.
That was a lot of money in those days.
Yes, it was.
Especially for a school teacher.
Yes, and when I started Middletown, it was at 900, it was at 1,000.
Oh, really? Well, now you mentioned GE, that was General Electric.
Yes, and that was the year of the Depression was coming upon us fast.
Was that 29? Or after?
No, that was 1931 was my first year in Schenectady.
Mm-hmm.
And 1930-31. And I was put in a large school with a wonderful principal.
Was this elementary school?
Elementary school, of course. I wouldn't teach high school for anything. And I wanted first grade, but we got a second grade, and that was next best. And I taught there 2 years. The second year, the GE was having great difficulties during the Depression. As all of Schenectady was so dependent on the GE, it affected everyone. And they found they would have to let go of the teachers who were not on tenure. Hopefully just a few. And altogether, there were 63 teachers who had not been, could not be on tenure yet. They'd been there 1 year or 2 years. And so one by one they were let go, and they thought they were going, it sounds good.
You were saying they did not want to let you go.
And so I was the 63rd to be let go and was told 3 days before school ended. And of course, there was nothing anywhere around that part of New York State. And so I telephoned the family and said, "Will you take me in?" Which amused them greatly. And they say, "Aren't you coming home for the summer anyway?" And I said, "Yes." But I said, I meant next fall, if I can't get anything. And I won't tell you what the family said because it was too lovely to repeat on a record. And once again, I feel that the good Lord had his hand in it absolutely, because there were no positions here on the island any more than there were in New York State. But at that time, I weighed barely 98 pounds. And it might have been called skinny.
And you were tall, too.
And yes, and dear old Dr. Sullivan got hold of me and said, we're going to spend this year fattening you up. And so I gained and gained, and unfortunately all my clothes didn't fit, and I had to get new ones, but somebody that was going to college that year profited by it, a friend of mine, and that was made me happy. And unfortunately, I went up from size 10 and 12 up to size 20. And I didn't appreciate what Dr. Sullivan had done to me at all. But anyway, the first year I moved back here, I did not teach. But I kept busy because I'm always busy, up to my neck and over.
What sort of things did you do?
Well, we had a new minister in the Middletown Methodist Church, and I had parted company with St. Paul's Methodist Church and had wanted to go out in the country. And Mother and Daddy, and in the next New Year's, we all joined, the four of us joined the church in Middletown. Mm-hmm. And so that this minister, they had 6 children, and I went out and helped with them a great deal because I just adored the family. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they were here only 1 year, but I went over and stayed in New Bedford with them before school began the next year, before I got my job. Mm-hmm. And so that was 1932 when I spent getting fat. And the next fall, after visiting this family in New Bedford and taking care of the other children because one was death's door, Mr. Maine, who was superintendent of Portsmouth and Middletown schools.
What was his first name?
Leonard, mm-hmm. Leonard Maine, called me up one day and asked me if I would be interested in a position. It would be only a half session at the Paradise School, which is now at the Historical Society building, and I would have afternoons. And I said, I certainly would love it. And he said, it will be a first and second grade. And my joy at that knew no bounds, too. Mm-hmm. And so that year, that school year, I taught at Paradise School. And
how big was the school? How many people?
One room.
One
room school and a stove in the middle. But fortunately, the teacher in the morning had to do the fire, and they didn't. It wasn't changed because I wouldn't have had the remotest idea to do it. And it was nice and toasty by the time I got there.
Uh-huh. How many people?
And when we went, we had to go out of doors when it was necessary. Mm. And it was lots of fun. It really was an education.
Well, now it covered only the first and second grades, did it?
In the morning was third and fourth, I believe.
I see.
And
you taught
mine was first and second.
How many pupils did you have?
I think it was. I think I went up to 29 at one time. That
and you
year.
were the only teacher in the afternoon.
In the afternoon, yes.
Mm-hmm. Did you like that?
And well, I was so thrilled to be back at teaching that yes, I did. I loved it. And I had one little boy in my class. I'm sure Mrs. Gus Noons will not mind if I tell this, but and poor little Gus, as you know, died a few weeks ago. But Mrs. Gus Noons came into class one day, and little Gus was having a lovely nap in Miss Crocker's lap. And she says, "What is going on here?" And I said, "Well, you know, as I've told you, it was quite far along. As it Gus, he came to school earlier than he should, like I did when I was a little girl, and he will not make first grade. He'll have to be first grade another year. And he's used to naps, you told me, in the afternoon, and of course, he's coming to school now in the afternoon. And, well, I told Mrs. Nunes that he would be there in first grade another year, and I felt that his sleep was more important when he just would do it out of nothing. And she agreed, and ever since back in 1933, we have laughed about it.
Remember any other of your pupils especially?
I remember all for many, many years, and I could tell you the name of every child. Well, I should say first that the next year I went to Howland School, which was a two-room school, where the new school of Middletown is. And while I was there, it grew from 2 rooms to 4 to 6, and since then they've put in still more rooms. And
that's the corner
of Third Beach Road and Wapping Road. And I could tell you the name of every child in my first grade. At first I had first, second, and third for 1 year. The next year, first and second. And after that, for the many years up until 1959 that I was at Howland and would not get out, I wanted to keep it. I had first grade alone. And I could tell you the name of every child, where the child sat, and what the child wore to school the first day of school. And sometimes I see one of the old-timers, and they rush up to me and say, "Do you remember me?" I said, "Why, certainly. You're Alice so-and-so." And the first day of school, I don't know if you remember, but I remember the little blue plaid dress you wore and a big butterfly bow on that black hair of yours. And you sat in the middle seat, the third seat in the third row, right in the middle of the room. And there were 2 other girls with her, and I told them the story too. It's uncanny what I can remember about those children the first years of my teaching.
Just amazing.
Of course, then I began to have more, and in 1959 I moved to New Oliphant, and Mr. Cager was the head of the school committee.
Now, wait a minute, let's see. New Oliphant is where?
On West Main Road. Little Oliphant, we called it, was a very old school there by the old public library next door to it. And then they built the big Oliphant of 10 rooms, but we used the cellar too when the Navy was just swarming all over the island. And so we had 14 rooms.
Was that on Oliphant Street or
Oliphant Lane? It faces Oliphant Lane, the big school. And Mr. Cager, the head of the school committee, told me that the school committee had voted that I be principal of the 2 Oliphant schools. And I said, "But I don't want to be. I want to stay at Howland." So a few days later, Mr. Cager, who died quite recently.
What was his first name?
Albert Cager, came down, and he had something behind his back, and he talked with me a minute or two, and then all of a sudden he pulled out a crowbar from behind his back and stuck it under me and raised me up and said, "You're going to Oliphant School no matter what."
Oh, so you had no choice.
So I went to Oliphant School, and I was thrilled to be a straight principal, no teaching. I was a teaching principal. They called me at Howland while it was growing, but I was a real true principal at Alfred School for 11 years.
Well, when you became principal, does that mean you did not teach at all
No,
anymore?
I did not teach.
You didn't have
I was
time.
supervising principal.
Didn't you miss your teaching?
Yes, I did miss it, but it was so thrilling to work with those girls that I soon felt much better about it. And then one day, when we had Mr. Godet as superintendent, he told us at principals meeting, "I have news for you folks. Each of you principals but one is going to be changed to another school in September." And he said, "You may ask for a certain school, but I think there should be changes around, and you may or you may not get it." Well, I asked for the Anchorage, and he told me I'd had Navy children all the time I was principal at Oliphant, and I certainly did because we were swarming with them. And he said, "You're going to Linden." And I'd been on the committee that when they were building Linden, and I wasn't stuck on going to Linden at all, but in the course of a week, I loved it just as much as Oliphant.
Now, where was Linden?
Yes, I'm made that way. Linden is the one next to the Pancake House on West Main Road. The red brick, one floor. But most of the time we had to use the basement, and they had to make those into rooms downstairs. And so that there were 14 rooms there.
Well, didn't you have Navy children there?
Yes,
too?
but they were neighborhood Navy.
I see.
It wasn't the Anchorage. See, I had the Anchorage and Naval Gardens, and that's where so many came from. And you would put a child on we had Navy registers in those days, and never had the principals had to work as hard on those things, because a child would come in, and I've known to stay 1-2 days, and yet this register had to be kept, for the rest of the year and so forth. It really was very, very difficult.
Well, of course, they were going in and out a great deal.
In and out a great deal.
What was the enrollment in that kind of in the Navy schools? I mean, where there were so many Navy children. I really don't know, Mrs. Everett. Hundreds?
Yes, there was. I think it ran up to almost 300 at Oliphant one year.
Good heavens! How many people would there be in a class? How many children?
Well, that is amusing, because nowadays no teacher wants more than 20 to 23 children, and in those days, well, my first year of teaching, I had 43, and in Schenectady, I had 43, and Paradise, I think it usually ran about 30 and would go up to between 37 to 40 for years and years and years. And I never had any class. And what's more, we teachers, I might as well get on the bandwagon here. We teachers, we went out to play with the children at recess. We didn't go in the teacher's room and drink coffee and eat donuts and so forth and so on, or have somebody else come and supervise. And I really think it was much better, because we got to know our children not only in the classroom, but how they behaved outside the classroom. And that is so tremendously important.
Is it?
And
what about discipline? Was there any problem with discipline in those days?
No, many's the time there was a little girl on Fridays. Certain days she would be kind of uppity when she came to school, so I would give her a little stronger than a love pat as she went upstairs in Howland School, and never had a minute's trouble with her. But nowadays you can scarcely look at them cross, but what they go home and talk to. I don't know whether in our talking here together, whether you want me to talk about school much, but
yes, I think it would be very interesting.
It is interesting. I always took pride while I was in the teaching business of knowing every single child in my school and their names, and I would always start with the older ones, because the little ones, if you called them honey or dear or something, they thought you knew their name. And the older ones I always started with, but I took great pride by the middle of October being able to recite the name of each child in every class that I had in the school. I grant you that when the Oliphant in the Navy, it took longer, but I knew the children, and never one morning went by when I was a principal that I didn't go to every room and say, "Good morning, boys and girls," and also go out and meet them as they came off the bus.
Did you?
And very often I would be on the playground, because that's when you got to know your youngsters. And you have to know the children.
What about their parents? Did you get acquainted with them
the parents, the letter went home from the very first, and the very first day the children took home with the rules and regulations of the school, and that I would always, if a teacher had to send a child to my office, I would sometime during the day call the parent and say this had occurred, so that Johnny would not go home and not tell the truth about the matter. And if it was something that was serious, the child, boy or girl, we closed the office doors, and the boy or girl called up his parents. Sometimes it had to be at work, but before the child could go home, he or she had to call up and say that what had happened. And in that way, there was the parent knew it from the day it had happened before she saw the child. And well, I earned $75 writing an article about it in an educational journal, and I know a number of schools have taken it up since. But it paid terrific dividends. And now you wouldn't, I don't believe the teachers could keep a child after school if you had a dental or a doctor's appointment. But in those days, I would call a parent and say, "I'm awfully sorry, but John can't keep his dental appointment today because he has to do work for 40 minutes after school," or something like that. And and another thing that worked beautifully, and I was proud of it, if a big to-do happened on the playground, and I would have the teacher send in the entire class unless she knew absolutely who were the ringleaders, and the children to go to the auditorium, and I would go in and say, "I haven't the slightest idea, boys and girls, what this is about. I'm sure there's some here that don't belong here because they haven't done anything. Maybe they were someplace else on the playground. So you, so-and-so, knowing him to be the ringleader, and you, I'm going to leave you here for, 5 or 10 minutes, and do some work in my office. And when you have dismissed the children, the same as your teacher would, and told them they can go out and play again because they knew nothing about this, why, come and get me, and I'll come in and tell you what the rest of us will have to do, because it's a serious thing. And it was big things, you know,
Yes.
Rocks being thrown at somebody, or a gang. And then, and if they had, I had wonderful, if anybody wrote on the school building, we didn't know who it was, the whole class had to go out and during school time, not a recess where the children would have an audience. They went out at school time, and then they made their time out after school. And those things worked. And the teachers, as far as I know, liked. They never came and said, I wish you'd change it or anything.
Well, it sounds very just.
But
Yeah.
I was fussy because I do not want children that don't do anything bad blamed. And I do not like a whole class punished for what 10 did.
And this was quite well accepted by the children, was it? And their
Oh,
parents,
yes,
too.
they knew it, and I had written and wrote it all out so the parents would know just what was going to happen. Another thing that I think was something I did, and it really turned out to be wonderful. Wonderful for the parents. If a youngster should fall down in the mud and get covered, or if a youngster had an accident in other ways, there were so many parents during the war working that instead of having to call a parent and have them come out with clean, dry clothes, I had a puddle box. 2 puddle boxes, one boys and one girls, an immense dry goods box. And in that box were dresses or trousers and blouses for every size that they could possibly be wearing in that school. And the teacher would send the child to me, and I'd say, now we're not going to interrupt mother or daddy, and after a while they just knew, you know.
Yes.
Can I have something out of the puddle box?
Uh-huh.
And so we'd find something that fit dry clothes, and if a child got, I had a couple that fell in the mud, and it just was hopeless. But I had one parent in the school, and the superintendent had given me permission that I could call on this parent, and the parents all knew who it was, and she would come up and get the child and take him or her home, and give him a bath, and take the clothes that I had that would fit that size, and bring him or her back to school.
What a marvelous idea.
And that happened, I think, only 4 times. But the parents were thrilled with this puddle box. And the idea was original, but it was great. There were shoes of every size that parents, when I started it, they sent them to me, you know. And more than once, I've had a little girl who liked the dress she wore home much better than any of her dresses. Miss Crocker, would you be willing if I sent a dress to school the same size tomorrow, letting Nancy keep this dress? And it was just great.
Certainly was.
Yeah, I got quite famous for those 2 things.
You must have, yes. Well, Ms. Crocker, we'll continue our conversation later. It's now July the 9th, 1948. Excuse me, 1984. And I'll ask you if you remember any more unusual things you did during your teaching career.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed wishing each youngster a happy birthday. I kept track of all the birthdays in the school, and also the teachers' birthdays, and as the youngsters got off the bus or sometime during the day, I let them know I knew their birthday. And the first grade, we had a grand celebration each time because we had a regular little ritual about how old the youngster was, and she had to have a birthday spanking. With the attitude about spanking in these days, I wonder what they would have done to me in those days. And if the slightest bit of the little ritual was forgotten, why, the whole class reminded me I'd left it out, and we had to put it in. And it's fun to think back to those days.
Did you ever want to teach in Newport or anywhere else besides Middletown?
No, I did not.
You really liked it here.
I just loved Middletown from the word go, the teaching, because there were so many golden opportunities to try out new ideas and have them appreciated, and each new day was a new adventure to me.
Did anybody in Newport or Portsmouth ever try to get you to come to
yes.
them? You were sought out, huh?
Yes. Miss Ruth Franklin was always after me, but she finally understood the reason I didn't want to go to Newport.
Well, I'd like to ask you some questions now about some major events which might have affected your life and your family's lives. For instance, about World War I. Do you have any memories of what happened to your family during that time?
Well, something very, very exciting, and I don't know if that's the word for it, and unusual was that back at that time, when there was the first draft, it wasn't as it was during the Second War. It was carried out in Washington, D.C., and the numbers of all the men that were drafted were put in a huge bowl and drawn out. And believe it or not, Woodrow Wilson, who was president, of course, at that time, the first number that was pulled out belonged to Daddy.
Oh, no.
Yes, I don't remember the number, but was very exciting and very awful in a way. And the village newspaper had it spread across the front. Charles E. Crocker, first number drawn in the war.
Was that the first your father knew about it?
And I don't remember because I wasn't very old.
I'm sure.
And sad to say, the newspaper we exhibited for some reason here in Newport for some sort of I just don't remember what it was, but we did along the way, and it was stolen, which was rather sad. But Daddy did not have to go because he had a wife and 2 children, and they honored that from the ground up in the First War.
So the First World War really had very little effect on you?
Well, Daddy joined a home guard, it was called, and they used to go out and dig ditches and do all these different things that they might have to do if if the United States was involved in war. And it used to tickle us. He came home so dirty. And he was so clean usually.
Well, did your mother do anything such as Red Cross work?
Oh, yes, she did a lot of Red Cross work, and I got so sick and tired of cutting up little snibbles of material to make pillows for the poor soldiers. And I learned to knit. And the whole family, the ladies all knitted.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I remember those things very well, but not much else.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, and I wonder if you have any memories of the Fall River line. Did you ride on it?
Pardon?
Did you ride on it?
Yes, several times, and I was very thrilled at the age of 13 to be allowed to come up on it to Newport. And
alone?
Yes, alone.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone met me and put me on a train for the Cape, and I went down to West Hyannis to spend for a few weeks with a friend.
Uh-huh. Well, did you have fun on the boat?
Oh, I was thrilled to pieces to be on,
because
I loved any boat, from a canoe to although I never was on an ocean liner except to see friends off.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember which ship it was that you took on the Fall River line that time?
If the Commonwealth was one, it was that.
Mm-hmm. I don't
That sticks in my mind, but I really don't remember.
Uh-huh. Do you remember what sort of stateroom you had, or anything about the food or music? What did you do?
The food was awful.
Was it?
And well, they did have a band, come to think about it. I haven't thought about that trip in years.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't too clear. Except I sat and my mother had made me a darling little dress with a lot of hand embroidery on it, and they had varnished some seats, and I sat in one, and the trip wasn't at its best because I had this varnish all over this new dress, and I was heart sick about Mommy would say about it.
I imagine so. Well, did you write it again later and before it finally?
Yes, I came up with Daddy a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. All right. Are you aware of any particular problems that you'd like to see corrected?
Oh, goodness. I'd have to do some thinking, really, about that.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I know you love people. You know so many people. You have so many friends.
Oh, I do. I just do like people so much.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like a very happy, successful life to me.
And it's very thrilling also to be loved by so many.
Mm-hmm.
One got on and sat beside me, and I didn't even look up because I taught to be so careful.
Mm-hmm.
And finally I heard the gentleman clear his voice, and it was a dead giveaway, and it was Daddy. And I jumped up and threw myself on him and hugged him and kissed him, and the whole car was thrilled.
Oh, he could tell you were well trained. Were you aware of any of the maintenance or any of the other operations of the Fall River line?
No, we used to always take company down and watch. If we had company, they loved to go down and watch the boat come in and go out again.
Mm-hmm.
And half of Newport was down there doing the same thing.
Watching.
And you hear stories about somebody running down on the dock and jumping on the boat, and it turns out it was coming in. I've read that in stories many times, and it really happened one evening. And the man, he took an awful chance because it was quite a distance, but he made it. He called out, "I made it," and everybody roared.
Well, were you particularly aware of anything happening when the Fall River Line failed, went out of business? Didn't,
Oh, we were disappointed because it was so much a part of Newport.
Well, and
I love to see it come in and out and
yes.
so on.
Let me take you into the Depression. You spoke a little bit about it earlier, but do you remember anything particularly about how the island as a whole was affected by the Depression? Was there a lot of hard times?
It sounds awful to say I don't remember, but I really it should have made an awful impression on me, but.
Well, I've heard a number of people say the same thing.
Newport just went on and on. It just seemed. Of course, you heard people talking about not being maybe they're losing a job and you felt terribly about it, or they finally got something, but I don't remember too much.
Did you ever hear of the Civic Employment Association? Means nothing to you.
No, it doesn't.
And you weren't aware of anything that the New Deal policies did or how they affected?
Whoever listens to the tape will think I'm a dumb bunny, but I don't remember those things at all.
So you didn't know any people who were directly affected at all. Well, what about Prohibition? Do you have any memories of how that affected the island, or Middletown, or Newport? Do you think it was a good thing when it came in? Of course, you were pretty young.
I don't remember too much about that because we never had a drop of anything in our house. And Daddy was rabid about it. And he was very grateful about it, but I don't think I registered much about it.
So you didn't hear any of the stories?
And a couple of friends that we had that loved the stuff would get it somehow, and we didn't appreciate that either.
Did you hear any of the stories about smuggling?
Just what would be in the newspaper or on the radio, such as it was, but...
Well, that was not much.
I sound stupid, but I don't.
Not at all. If it didn't affect you, how could you say anything about it? Well, I'm sure the hurricane of 1938 had some effect on your life. Where were you when it happened?
I was teaching school at Howland School, and I could not get a hold of Mr. Main, but I knew right well that when the wind came up through Third Beach Road and all, that I had to get those children home. And so I called several friends, and our Methodist minister had already come over and said that we must get the children home, and he took several loads, and friends took several loads, and we got them all at home. And then my partner, Miss Ethel Luth, and I decided we were going to leave too. And by that time our telephone was out there, and I was the driver that week, and we came along down Green End Avenue as usual, and down by the reservoir it was coming up over the bank, and I didn't know whether I dared go through it or not. And Miss Luz opened the car door to see how really deep it was, and she fell out and cut her wrist, not badly, but some, and she got back in the car, and we decided to go on, and I did get her home over on Washington Street. And it was wild and woolly over there, although the street wasn't too wet at that time. And then I came up, and I don't know just how I landed over on, why I went over toward Green End Avenue again or not, but I came through my Aunt Nomi Avenue, and I the next morning, when I went by Vidi's Sunoco station, and I heard awful noises as I went along there. And then I lived on Dudley Avenue, and I made it across Broadway and went down home. And our plum trees had fallen over, but I was able to get into the garage, fortunately. And the next morning, when we went out to see all the difficulties and the awful things that had happened, the man at Vidi's gas station told me that 13 trees had fallen just behind me because he went out and counted them. So I guess that my time hadn't come yet, but it sure might have.
Oh, that was close.
And Daddy was still out at Oakland Farm, and our telephone was still in, and he called up that he was on his way in. And he didn't come and didn't come and didn't come. And he had quite a number of adventures getting in, and it took him about 2 hours to come in from the Vanderbilt estate to Dudley Avenue.
Trees down, I suppose.
Yes, it was dreadful.
Well, was the school that you evacuated particularly vulnerable to the storm?
No, there were no trees around it, fortunately, but I didn't feel I wanted to be responsible for those children in school. I wanted them to get home.
And then also, was your house on Dudley Avenue safe? You didn't feel any worry there about the hurricane?
No, just our beloved plum trees that bore so beautifully each year and afforded so many friends lovely plums, were gone. We did not, yes, we lost a small elm tree, but the big elm tree tipped considerably, but it didn't go over.
Were you, how did you feel? Were you really frightened, or did you think this was just another bad storm?
Well, at the time things happen, I always rise to the occasion and pay up for it later.
Well, what about when the storm was all over? What did people do?
Went out to see what they could see.
Well, do you remember the cleaning up? That must have been a terrific job.
It was an awful job.
Was it mostly
Along Bellevue Avenue was so sad.
What happened on Bellevue Avenue?
Oh, so many trees down, so many trees and bushes. Just so sad.
How long did it
It's so wonderful to see them so glorious now again.
Yes. How long how long did it take to cut down all the tree stumps and clear it away?
I don't remember it all.
But you could get through the streets all right pretty soon?
Yes, it was amazing that first day how we got through. I don't know how we did it.
Okay. Then.
Oakland Farm lost a great many trees.
Did it? Well, it was closer to the water, wasn't it?
No, it's nowhere near water. Just one little pond they had.
Well, then let's go to World War II. You said, I believe earlier, that your brother was drafted for that.
Yes, he was. And off he went.
He really had to go.
Yes, he was. He went down to Georgia for training, and then he went to Alabama someplace, and then he came home for a nice furlough, and off he went to Europe. And coming back from Europe, 4 years later, he came on an Italian liner, and the old captain, it was going to be his last trip across, and it was the worst trip that he had made in the many, many years that he had been captain of the vessel. And only the captain and my brother were not seasick.
Oh, the water was so rough. That's quite a record. Well, how are you all affected here back home? Do you remember what rationing meant?
Oh, yes, I had charge of sugar rationing at school. And I remember that very well because the last night of it, had my appendix out. That was funny.
Well, when you say you had charge of the rationing, what did you do? How did you take charge of it?
You got parents to come in and after school and work on it, you know, people that were willing to. And I've forgotten how long it lasted.
Well, I don't understand.
But everyone was very cooperative. I know that. They were wonderful.
Well, I just don't understand what you meant.
Well, they had several days of rationing. I've forgotten how long. I should have looked in my diary. And they did it at school, the same as they did the other rationing at the town halls.
You mean they gave out the sugar there?
The booklets.
Oh, the booklets were given out at the school, and just only for sugar.
I think it was only for sugar.
Well, how did you give it out?
Well, I don't remember it much. I'm sorry, I really don't.
I just didn't know how it went.
Because I really don't know, but I know it went on quite a little while.
Mm-hmm. Did you and your family mind the rationing much? Did you find that you were short of food?
No, because Mother and Daddy were good planners, and they did too much, and we weren't much sugar eaters anyway, and
But no.
the gasoline was kind of tough, because we liked to drive and ride.
Mm-hmm. What else was rationed? Meat?
I think I recall we had a little time of rationing meat.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so busy at school all the time that I don't remember. But it's interesting that they must have expected that if trouble came over here, well, they did expect that if trouble came over here, it would strike Newport, this island first thing. And therefore, plans were made in Portsmouth and then Middletown and in Newport for the evacuation of the children. And I had a great deal to do with that. And I had training sessions with parents and also teachers that would have to go with the children. And they would have been taken over South County and also places in Massachusetts. And everyone wore dog tags.
Really?
For weeks on end. And the children had drills, bringing little bags to school with what they could take at one change of clothes. And
was that
it was
early?
all, I don't remember what part of it was. It was quite early. Mm-hmm. There was a good scare. And the children all brought chocolate in their bags. I remember that. And we knew just exactly what place we were to go if anything happened. And I always wondered how we'd get off the island if anything happened before.
I was going to ask you.
Beforehand.
Did they have boats arranged?
And yes, buses and all. And it was all beautifully stamped out what would happen. Mm-hmm. And I remember going to Portsmouth and giving several talks at the school to parents that would be going with them, would go with them, and a little bit of psychology thrown in. Mm-hmm. Quite a lot was thrown in, and they'd have a drill, and everybody would come to school just as if it was the real thing, and with their dog tags and all.
When you say psychology, you mean trying to make them feel braver about it?
Yes, the rudiments of such things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And used to have drills where the children, there would be a warning, such as a fire bell or something, and the children would go down in the basement of the school. And sometimes it would be a room drill, and they would have to get down under their desks. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't thought of this in quite a long while, but it was It was a long period of time, and it seemed to me, as I look back, that we had to be ready, and
Well, you said that there was a real scare for a while. What?
I don't remember what I don't remember
Well, of course,
the powers that be must have had some warning and told to do all this, of course, but
well, a lot of defense installations were put up in
Yes, they
Newport and
certainly were.
Middletown, and I don't know about the upper part of the island. Were there some up there too? You know?
there must have been a lot around over Third Beach Roadway.
Well, people were really afraid that there would be an attack for a while.
Well, we were made to feel that it might be.
Well,
They're grown-ups.
Did people feel better for having those defense installations, or did they think there'd be a target more for it?
I don't remember.
Well, what sort of security measures did you have to take in your home, your house, or in your school too?
Thing I remember is about the children, the children and the parents.
Well, I mean, did you have to have blackout curtains?
No, we didn't in school, but we did at home. We did at home. I think it was what you wanted to do, but we had dark curtains.
Did you use them every night?
No, I don't think so.
Just when there was an alert?
When they talked a lot about it, then we did.
Yes, I see. Then, of course, there were people who went around the neighborhood, air raid wardens they were called, I believe, who checked to see that the curtains were pulled. Did your family get involved in any of that?
My daddy was one.
Was he?
Yes, he was one over, it wasn't in the neighborhood, it was, it isn't written down, so I don't recall, but I know he was out someplace.
What about your mother? Did she do any volunteer work again?
That's a lot of Red Cross work, Mommy did.
And what about you? Did you have any time for any such thing as that?
No, because I was in charge of all that other.
Yes.
It was
Doing a lot.
very tiring.
Did all the activity on Rhode Island at the torpedo station affect your work in any way?
I don't think so. Not out in Middletown, anyway, I'm quite sure. School went along amazingly well, considering the interruptions, and it was a case you just had to organize better than you ever had before.
Do you remember anything special happening on VE or VJ days? Any celebrations?
That's the usual, what everyone else did, I think. I sound awfully dumb not to be able to remember these things, but
You would remember
I
them well
don't remember the details.
if they really affected
Went along
you.
with the crowd, I guess.
Sure. Well, now, of course, one of the big things that happened to the island, and I guess especially Newport, was the departure of the Navy fleet. Did that affect the attendance at your school?
Oh, I should say so.
You mentioned something about this earlier, but
Yes, it did. One of the toughest jobs that we had while the Navy was here was keeping naval registers along with regular school registers, and that was a headache and a half. Because if a child was there just one day, you had to do a tailspin, getting everything down about that child and all, and then carrying it along. And there was such a turnover, of course. I really think Middletown, more so than Newport, because we had the Naval Gardens and the Anchorage.
yes.
And Melville. And it was a circus.
Well, you say when you had to find out about each child, you had to write down their...
Well, of course, the parents made out questionnaires and so on, and this register business was very, very difficult. I found it, and especially if you were a principal of the school and had to check everybody else's. It was a nightmare. And sometimes it took several days to find an error because, as I say, they might come for a week and then be suddenly transferred again, or even a few days. I had several stayed only overnight, enough to register the child, and then mother would come in the next day and say, believe it or not, we're moving.
Well, when the child left, were you responsible for sending any records on with them?
Yes, we had to send different things on.
Well, I can see that was a lot of paperwork.
It certainly was.
Did any of the Navy people live in your neighborhood so that you saw any housing affected directly?
Not any, oh, it might be a neighbor or two, but as usual. It wasn't anything, there were so many in those developments in Middletown.
Yes. Did you think that the fleet pullout would have any great effect on the island?
Well, yes, on education, because the schools didn't need the number of teachers they did, and it was sad to let some go, of course. And very much so. I lost some excellent teachers.
How many would you say you had to let go?
I wouldn't dare say. Of course, they just wouldn't be hired for the next year. And those girls wouldn't be on tenure because they were here for the emergency. Twice I had classes that had no teacher, and one appeared the morning that school began and were taken in. She was one of the best teachers I ever had. I remember that one. Stopped to see me last summer. We had a good talk.
Where did those teachers who lost their jobs go? Were they able to
Well, a great many of those girls were Navy girls. Their husbands were sent out too. We lost teachers along with the children. Well, never knew what a day would bring forth, I tell you right now.
Well, after the fleet had gone, I guess things settled down to a pretty steady kind of
Pretty
education.
much. A lot of plans had to be dropped. They expected to build a large school out in Middletown, but never needed to be built. And because the Melville School could be discontinued, the one that was not the one that is still going strong now on the West Main Road, but another one that was, two buildings were used down on the Melville grounds.
Do you have any idea how many pupils did go?
I wouldn't have the slightest idea.
Hundreds or whatever. Well, I want to ask you now about the Newport Bridges and Newport Bridge and the ferry ride. Did you ride the ferries very much?
Well, we usually went around up to Fall River,
You did.
but it took too long to monkey with the ferry. Although I just love ferries.
Did you ride once in a while just for the pleasure of it?
A couple of times.
Well, were you particularly glad or sad to see the bridge as built?
Oh no, we were delighted. We were surprised the number of people that weren't pleased.
So you had
Same as the ferries giving up on. Some didn't want it at all.
Do you think that the bridges affected the island very much?
I wouldn't venture to say really because, of course, there was more traffic, but...
Yeah. Did you have any interest in the restoration of the old colonial houses in the area?
We were delighted that they were going to do it.
Had you been aware of the old houses falling down at all? Had you thought about it?
No, I've been in quite a number of them, and I was glad that my house didn't look like some of them did inside, and some of them had looked kind of seedy. Daddy had occasion to go in some of them, and he knew how I loved to go in houses, so he always took me with him. Usually took me with him. So I got in quite a number of the old ones when he did errands for Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt.
I see. Well, did you think that it was too bad to see them
Of course.
So, you really wanted to see them restored, hmm?
Oh, yes.
But you
I
didn't
think it's
have
wonderful the way it is now.
You had no direct experiences with those.
The breakers, I always felt they kept that up beautifully.
Oh, Miss Crocker, when did you retire? How long ago?
12 years ago.
12 years. What sort of things have you been doing since that time?
That was after 41 years being on the job. And that was a wonderful occasion.
Oh, tell me about that.
It was just beautiful. The girls, my teachers, did such a job. The afternoon, I told them on Valentine's Day that year, and 1972, and each one found the news with, they must pledge their secrecy not to broadcast it around town, and I don't think anyone did, which pleased me very much, and until the school committee came out with it. But the very day that they heard that I was going to retire, they set the date for the retirement party, May 13th. They wondered if I would mind having it on the 13th, and I said I would be delighted because all the big things in my life had happened on the 13th. And that was my mother's birthday also, May 13th, and it would be great to have it that day, even though she wasn't here to attend. And we had it at the Coachman.
In Portsmouth.
In Portsmouth.
No, that's Tiverton, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it is Tiverton, isn't it? I always give Tiverton credit for that nice place. And it was beautiful. It was amusing. I'm very fond of the theme song for the song Somewhere My Love that I was crazy about. And they paid a pianist to come and play different music, but especially that every so often. And there was some sort of an alcove where the piano was, and nobody ever heard it. Oh. And I always felt sorry that the girls wasted that money. And one thing they did, and they're still doing it at the Coachman, was the girl that was in charge of the committee went up after all plans were made, and she said that there was one more thing, and she did hope that they would put extra help on for their principal's dinner, because they were very anxious that the head table, when they were finished, all the other tables would be finished also. Because whenever they'd gone there to dinners, it had not been that way. And whoever ran the Coachman at that time said, well, give him a few days to think about it, because they said they weren't coming there unless that could be done. And so they went up, and he said he would put extra help on so that most everyone could finish at the same time, and everyone did. And they were very pleased about it, and I understand they've done.
Well, then the party was a great success. How many people were there? Say that most of the teachers in the school system were there?
Oh, yes.
So you had a pretty good crowd.
Yes, and oh my. And my beautiful Zenith colored television still works perfectly.
That's what they gave you.
And my beautiful lamp. I never had a lamp I liked better.
That one over there, isn't it pretty? It's a brass
Yes.
lamp.
Yes.
Nice.
And I also had money. And
Did you?
it was really, and one of the very nicest things about the whole thing was that Daddy was still with me, and he had a whale of a time. And when he came home that night, he said, look at me, I just looked in the mirror, and he was covered with lipstick here and there. And he said, oh, it's a shame to wash it off, because all of those teachers and folks were so wonderful to kiss me.
He enjoyed as much as you did.
Oh, yes, he did. And I just can't believe the things that were said. It was so lovely.
Did you have some sort of booklet that people wrote in for you?
Oh, yes, I had a guest book, and I had a beautiful program of it. And here in my living room hangs the beautiful tribute from the school committee. I read it often because it still holds me to my best.
Uh-huh. Where is it? Oh, over there. I see it. It's quite a big one.
And the school committee was so thrilled that Daddy was with me because maybe it sounds funny, but everybody loved Daddy.
I believe it from what you've told me. He's a remarkable man. Well, when you retired, did you miss your classes very much? Your schools, I should say.
No, because I closed the door on it, and that was it, and I had made up my mind. I feel that retirement, it should be a new beginning. And on the program, they had remarks by Miss Crocker, and most of the testimonial dinners that I go to, when it comes to that, where they just thank the people that did something. And I didn't take remarks. The word remarks is, of course, I thanked everyone, and they knew as I went along how much I was enjoying it and how much it meant to me, too. But I thought it meant I should give a little talk. So I gave a little talk on what I felt that retirement should be. And I was asked to repeat it for several groups after that.
Were you?
And yes, and I was asked to, I gave it at Salva Regina a couple of times too.
Well, it must have been quite a speech.
And it wasn't long, but it's, I just have certain beliefs about it. It's all the time you're you're preparing for retirement when you get along a certain age and all, and you should really truly think about it. And it's do something different, so
Well,
I did something different.
What did you start to do?
Well, I volunteered in quite a number of things, and I served 9 years. Meals on Wheels.
Oh, yes.
And only missed when I went away during the summer for a week or two. And
that was from the Newport Hospital.
That was from the Newport Hospital, and I enjoyed it.
You don't do that anymore?
I made some lasting friendships. No, I wanted to finish out 10 years, but and poor old legs began giving me trouble, and Dr. Hopper wouldn't let me finish out the 10th year. And I made some lasting friendships because some of the people to whom I took dinners have been at nursing homes since then, and I've gone to see them. And then Daddy had to go to Daddy was the first patient at the Grand Islander. Was there all alone, thought it was a hotel that had no other people, and was quite perturbed the first night. And he was there he was there 2 years and 2 months, and I did quite a lot of things there when he was there. But when Daddy went, I asked if they would like me to continue volunteering, and I have volunteered ever since the day that I came home from Daddy's internment in Tarrytown, New York, and only miss very seldom.
You spend a lot of time there. That Grand Islander is in Middletown on
Green End Avenue.
Green End Avenue.
And I have charged the food truck in the beautiful blue dining room all these years.
Well, you go over there in the afternoon?
Yes, I go over at 3:30 and I stay till about 7 every day.
And then you're in charge of the food truck. What else do you do?
Oh, I put get some of the little old folks ready for bed and visit quite a number of them. And some of them that have very few visitors need a good night kiss, so they get that. And I just love so many of those people over there. It's unbelievable.
How many people are in there?
Well, the place holds 180. I don't have anything to do with the C wing, really, or the Medicare, but the AB wing I consider sort of mine. And each day I go the length of the corridor and to see everybody before I start any work.
Oh, do you? Just like calling on your school classes when you first started out. Well, you're also active in the AAUW, I believe, the American Association.
I was for many years and served on the state board for 15 years.
Did you?
And I was secretary for umpty-ump years of the local chapter. And I'm ashamed that I don't go very often now, but the old crowd, time changes things.
Yes, of course.
And I would not think of not paying my dues because I'm proud to belong to the AAUW. And I help where I can. I help with all the book fairs when they had them. But it sort of comes the wrong night, and I don't get to very many meetings, I have to admit, and I feel sorry.
Well, when you were on the state board, where did that meet?
Providence. Oh, no, around different places.
Did it?
They came to the different branches, different places.
What sort of jobs did you hold on the state board?
Secretary.
You never were president?
No, I refused that.
Yes.
I was vice president two different times. But I did not wish to be president of anything, really.
Did you go to conventions?
I went to one in Boston. That was the only convention I went. I'm a very devoted member to, and I'm very proud to belong to Delta Kappa Gamma. That is not a sorority.
No, I know what that is.
And that is something you cannot ask to join.
That's
But,
a teacher's.
Yes, it's for key women educators. And you have to be asked to be a member, usually because, well, if you're considered a superior teacher, or if you're, or if you write, had things published, or if you've entered into a great many things in connection with education. I'm very pleased to be considered in for all three things. And I'm very, very neck deep in it and have been right along.
Well,
Up until I broke my hip a year ago, I had never, in the years since 1959 when I joined, I think it was 61. I don't know whether it was 59 or 61. And I had never missed a chapter meeting or a board meeting or a state convention.
well, where were the local meetings? In Middletown? Or?
Well,
On the
there are now 8 chapters in the state. When I joined, there were only 5, and ours Gamma chapter embraces this island and all down Barrington and all this side of the river.
So, and then the state conventions were held where? Various places too?
They were mostly in Providence, but this past year we had it at the Whispering Pines, the Alton Jones campus of Rhode Island University, and we had such a lovely time, and some of us stayed overnight, and we voted to have it there next year too.
Were you secretary of your sorority too?
It isn't a sorority.
Isn't it a sorority?
Mrs. Everett, no, it
Well,
isn't.
it has
It
those-
is not a sorority. It is a...
That can be a good name too.
Yes, I know it can, but it isn't like a college sorority at all.
No, I know, it's an honorary
It's an honorary
organization.
society.
Society.
It is
Okay, that's the
considered a
word.
society.
Uh-huh.
And, well, I, was secretary for state secretary for for triennium. And then I was secretary for another triennium. And I was secretary of the chapter for several years. And I was president of my chapter for 3 years. And
You've certainly been active in it.
yes, I certainly have been, and enjoy it so much. And I've been the past. I've been to 8 conventions. One year it's international convention, and then the next year there is the regional conference. And I've been to 11 of those. Mixture of the two, 11 years I've been. Not going this year. It's out to Las Vegas, and I'm not interested.
You don't want to go to Las Vegas.
No, I heard it was 117 degrees very often in Las Vegas, and heat and I don't agree.
Well, you should stay right here.
They've been wonderful, though, and so many lasting friendships I've made. It's just great.
Well, you're also a member of the Middletown Methodist Church. Is that the name of it?
Calvary United
Calvary
Methodist
United.
Church.
And where is that?
There's nothing, I guess, I haven't done out there.
That's on the corner of...
Turner and Wyatt Roads.
Uh-huh.
Of course, it used to be a little church across the road for many years. And when I came, I was on the basketball team. Didn't do much for it, but I was on the basketball team back in 1932. And I taught Sunday school for 50 years straight in wherever I was. And I sang in the choir for 50 years, retired on a Sunday of the 51st year began. And haven't much voice, but along with everybody else, nobody noticed it. And I ran so many workshops in connection with what we call church night on Wednesday nights for Umpty Ump years. And
Any special ministers you remember at the church?
I loved most of them. Especially Mr. Spurrier. Mr. Spurrier was here only 1 year, and he came the year he was here the year that I came here. And he was just great. And he had 6 children, and as I did not teach that year, I just about lived out at the parsonage. And
I think you
just
mentioned
loved them, yes. I think I mentioned before.
Yes, you did. You helped take care of them.
Yes, I did, many a time. And, there were so many. I really like most of them. And
Well, did you
the last ones we had, Mr. Luthi was special to everybody. And he was here 13 years, which is most unusual for a Methodist minister. And now very few are allowed to stay more than 8 or 9. And if you love them dearly and they're just doing everything imaginable, why you hate to see them go. And of course I was very sorry to see Mr. Doopy go. And Mr. Tavener retired last year and teaches now at St. George's School. And it's so nice that they're still in town. It's just great. And we're very, very fond of our new Reverend Dr. Ivy.
Did your mother and father go to that same church?
Oh, yes.
You were brought up as a Methodist.
Yes, but I was a Presbyterian when I was in college.
Oh, were you?
Because I didn't like the Methodist church.
Oh. Well, now I know that 1 year, since I've been here, you were named Woman of the Year. Tell me about that. Who does the naming and what happened?
The Women's Chamber of Commerce Committee.
Nice.
And one night at the Grand Islander, I working away, and they paged me to answer the phone, and this voice said, Mrs. Crocker, this is Mrs. Holzlander, and I want to tell you that last night you were named Woman of the Year. And that was 7 years ago. Woman of the Year. I couldn't say a single word. And she said, Miss Crocker, are you there? And I grunted. And then she said again, are you all right? And I gave another grunt. I couldn't open my mouth. I couldn't say a word. And finally, I did. I can't guess how I sounded. I know it was just terrible because we've laughed about it many times since. And I said, oh, I don't deserve that. Why was I saying that as though it was something awful? And so she proceeded to tell me some reasons why. And, I said, oh, it's so exciting, but, and I just kept running, And so I was Woman of the Year that year. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing.
What sort of ceremony did they have for you?
Well, it was the turn for the Viking to have it at the Viking, but the Viking was being remodeled or something, and I'll be frank, I didn't want it at the Viking, and I was very happy when they said we were going to have it at the Sheraton Islander, and it was also exciting. And it was the foggiest night of the year, and there can be a great deal of fog at the Sheraton Islander. Mm-hmm. It was just dreadful. And but folks came from all around the state, and and all the things to which I belong, the members were so faithful and came, and great many Delta Kappa Gamma. There was a whole table of Delta Kappa Gamma, a big table, and really more, but there was that. And one very exciting thing that happened was a former pupil of my first class in Schenectady, New York, had come to and was staying at the Sheraton Islander for a couple of nights, but I hadn't seen her because she and her husband were going to a wedding in New Bedford, and they'd never been to Newport, so that's why they decided to stay and then drive over to New Bedford. So they attended the wedding on Saturday afternoon. And the night before, they had noticed on the bulletin board of the Sheraton Islander that the next night there was to be, Sunday night, there was to be a Woman of the Year dinner for Miss Helen Crocker. And Susan nearly dropped dead, and they got on the telephone. They found out from who was in charge at the hotel, and they called to see if there was any chance that they might be able to get tickets and attend. And the person I think it got to was Mrs. Holzlander, I think, and she was so pleased that somebody from my first class in Schenectady would be in town, because they had wanted to, couldn't do anything about that. Mm-hmm. And so I had no idea of it, of course, until Susan and David walked in, and I thought they looked familiar. And I'd seen Susan quite a lot during. In fact, she calls me Aunt Helen because I used to visit them at their summer place, and there was three girls in the family, and the mother thought it would be nice if I was Aunt Helen to them, and so I always have been. And quite a number of nieces and nephews I have. Mm-hmm. And that way, no other way.
Yes.
And so Susan and David sat with my brother and his wife at a special table. And it was so wonderful to think this all had happened. Wasn't that strange?
Yes, it was. A
Of
little,
all the year, 365 days, that she should be there that one day.
a little miracle. Hmm?
Yes, it was so great. And they were very sweet and gave a little talk.
Uh-huh. Well, what sort of commemorative thing did the businesswomen give to you as their for a little award? They named you, but there must be some sort of commemorative plaque or scroll or that sort of thing. They gave you your guest book.
Oh, yes, it was a lovely guest book, and they gave me a tape of all of it. Unfortunately, I didn't have a machine to use it on, but I borrowed. And and then they took a great many pictures, which I look at quite often. And there were many testimonials from people upstate, of course, as usual, upstate, and the school department, and well, most everything I belonged to came across with lovely remarks.
It was really an event.
And I was sorry my parents couldn't be there.
Yes, that is a shame.
And there, too, I gave quite a little talk on retirement.
Did you?
And I think it was after that that Salva Regina asked me to come and talk, not after the other one.
I see. I'm interested in your nice home here, Miss Crockett. It's at number 40 South Drive, which is called Slate Hill Farm.
And my house is called Duntarrin.
How do you spell that?
Dunterrin. I thought I might be through tearing around, but it was only the beginning. But it's still Duntarrin. And a friend of mine liked it so much that she built a house and named it that before I got mine built. Because I was going, for years, I planned to name it that. Unfortunately, the naughty boys that come around now and again have ruined the sign, and it costs too much to have it made again, and so that I'm sorry about that, but a great deal of mail comes to Duntarrin.
Does it? When did you build the house?
Oh, heaven.
1962?
It was built in 1962.
Well, did
I've
you
been
design
planning
it?
it for many years and saving.
Who designed it? Did you design it?
Well, it was built on a basic plan that Mr. Cager had loaned to me, and
Former principal?
no, Mr. Cager that started Slate Hill Farm.
Oh, I see.
The originator of Slate Hill Farm, and also Lawrence Farms, and another one over on Bellevue Avenue.
What's his first name?
Albert Cager.
Albert Cager.
He died recently.
I see.
And
well,
it was very, there were many requirements here. You had to have wooden roofs to all the houses. And you could have Cape Cod houses, or there were 4 kinds of houses, but that you might have Dutch colonial. And that's why so many of them are like, and we like it that way. A couple of people built a little bit later anything but that type of house. But fortunately, the greater percentage of the houses are the types that Mr. Cager wished to have here. And I don't remember the others because I was always going to have a Cape Cod house.
Well, were you among the earliest to build here, or were there quite a few?
Mine, I think mine was one of the first 10 lots that were sold. And my parents let me go through all the rigors of buying a lot. But one day sat me down and told me that now I knew how to buy a lot, they would tell me that they had already paid for the lot some while ago and it was mine.
Oh.
But they felt I should be educated. And I had a basic plan, but I made quite a number of changes in it. There are 4 houses up here, the same basic plan, but you would have to look carefully through the development to see that they were the same, because they're really not the same. We all did something different. I did mine in reverse of the one I knew was that I was able to go into and see and make any changes I wished to make. And I love it.
Yes, it's a very nice house. And your mother and father lived here, too?
No, Daddy and Mother, I wanted to leave Dudley Avenue before something happened to Mother and Daddy, because I would certainly not know what to do with that big house. And so that's why I wanted very much to build. And I had in mind a Sakana Terrace so that I'd have a water view, but wise Daddy has always pointed out that here I would at least be on the line of a bus. And over there, if something happened to the car and all, it would be just too bad. And I'm so glad that he influenced me to build in Slate Hill Farm. And we broke ground in April and we moved in October. And my mother lived here, unfortunately, only 5 days because we just couldn't take care of her with me in school and all, and so we had to put her in what is now Bayview. Mr. Chapurian ran it, and we had no criticism whatever of it. She had wonderful care.
That's in Middletown, too, is it?
Now Bayview on
Yes.
my Aunt Nomi Avenue.
Oh, yes,
And Daddy continued to live with me until as I said, he moved to Grand Islander because I couldn't take care of him anymore.
Well, this was actually a farm before the houses were built on.
Yes, it was a big
Slate
farm.
Who owned that land, do you know?
Mr. Cager bought it.
But he wasn't the farmer.
I can't remember who he bought it from.
He was the developer.
I thought of it the other day, but I can't think of it now.
It's a big area.
Yes, it is.
Do you know how many acres it covers?
No, I don't, but each person has a half acre. And there are 54 houses, I believe.
That many. It's well hidden from the road, too.
Yes, because down by the pond there's but I chose a lot where I could see a tiny bit of the Newport Bridge, and not during summer with all the trees we have up here, but in winter I catch a glimpse of the bridge and the little teeny bit of water.
Well, you've lived in Middletown on Aquidneck Island a good many years, and I wonder what your feelings are about having lived here and still living here.
Well, when I lived in Tarrytown, New York, and the folks knew they were coming up here, they took me out in the woods to tell me we were going to move because they knew what effect it would have on me, and they thought the woods would be better to hear it than the neighborhood. And I'm sure it would be much worse now because I just love this island. And the fact that I wanted to stay in Middletown to teach and nowhere else shows that I love Middletown. And I'm very, very happy here. I truly am.
Do you keep up with politics in any way? Are you
Politics
interested?
are not for me.
Yes, so you don't really have any opinion of how the island is run.